Imagine a continent, fresh from the fires of revolution, a tapestry of new nations each vying for its place in the sun. This was South America in the mid-19th century, a place of simmering rivalries and soaring ambitions. And at the heart of this volatile landscape was Paraguay, a landlocked nation led by a man with a vision as grand as it was dangerous. What began as one man's dream of power would soon destroy an entire nation. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we delve into the tragic and often overlooked story of the Paraguayan War, also known as the War of the Triple Alliance. It's a conflict that by its end would claim the lives of a staggering percentage of Paraguay's population. To understand how this catastrophe unfolded, we must first look at the man at its center, Francisco Solano López. López inherited the leadership of Paraguay from his father, Carlos Antonio López, in 1862. But he wasn't just any heir. He was a man deeply impressed by the power and prestige of Europe, particularly Napoleon III's France. During a diplomatic tour, he had witnessed the might of modern armies and the grandeur of imperial courts. He returned to Paraguay with a burning desire to transform his isolated nation into a regional powerhouse, a South American Prussia. Under his father and then under his own command, Paraguay underwent a remarkable transformation. It was a period of intense modernization. They built telegraph lines, railways, and a formidable industrial base, including one of South America's first major iron foundries. Most significantly, López poured resources into his military. He created a standing army that, on paper, was one of the largest on the continent. Conscription was widespread, and the Paraguayan soldier was known for his discipline and fierce loyalty. López saw this army not just as a defense force, but as the instrument of his grand ambitions. He believed Paraguay deserved a place in the sun, a direct route to the Atlantic Ocean, and the respect of its much larger neighbors. Those neighbors were Brazil and Argentina, two giants who had long vied for dominance in the Rio de la Plata basin. For them, Paraguay was a strategic buffer state, a piece on the chessboard to be controlled, not an equal to be respected. The third key player was Uruguay, a nation caught in a perpetual state of civil war, a conflict that became the spark for the continental explosion. The situation in Uruguay was a proxy war. The ruling Blanco party was friendly to Paraguay, while the opposition Colorado party was backed by Brazil and, to a lesser extent, Argentina. López saw the fate of the Blancos as intrinsically linked to his own. He feared that if Brazil could install a puppet government in Uruguay, Paraguay would be next. It would be completely encircled by hostile powers, its access to the outside world via the river systems completely cut off. In 1864, the situation reached a boiling point. Brazil, tired of the cross-border raids and political instability, decided to intervene directly in Uruguay to support the Colorados. This was López's red line. He issued an ultimatum to the Brazilian Empire: withdraw your forces from Uruguay, or face the consequences. It was a stunningly bold move for a small, landlocked nation to threaten a continental empire. Brazil, confident in its size and power, ignored the ultimatum. López's response was swift and decisive. In November 1864, the Paraguayan Navy captured the Brazilian steamship, the Marquês de Olinda, as it sailed up the Paraguay River. Aboard was the new governor of the Brazilian province of Mato Grosso. It was a direct act of aggression. Shortly after, López ordered an invasion of Mato Grosso itself. The Paraguayan army, well prepared and highly motivated, swept into the sparsely populated Brazilian province with initial success. At this point, the war was only between Paraguay and Brazil. López believed he had seized the initiative, but his grand strategy required more. To effectively strike at Brazil's heartland and to relieve his allies in Uruguay, López needed to move his main army through Argentine territory. He requested permission from Argentine President Bartolomé Mitre to cross the Corrientes province. Mitre, who was officially neutral but secretly sympathetic to the Brazilian-backed Colorados, refused. He would not allow a foreign army to march across Argentine soil. López was faced with a critical choice. He could abandon his strategy and fight a defensive war, or he could double down. He chose the latter. Believing that some Argentine factions would rise up and join him against the government in Buenos Aires, And utterly convinced of his army's invincibility, López made a fateful decision. In March 1865, he declared war on Argentina. This was the catastrophic miscalculation from which there would be no return. By attacking Argentina, López had done the unthinkable. He had united the two great rivals of South America, Brazil and Argentina, against him. With the pro-Brazilian government now firmly in power in Uruguay, the Triple Alliance was born. Paraguay, the nation that sought to project its power, now found itself completely alone, surrounded by enemies who collectively dwarfed it in population, resources, and industrial capacity. The storm had broken. López's dream of a Paraguayan empire had instead forged a powerful coalition dedicated to its destruction. The initial Paraguayan offensive, a two-pronged invasion into Argentina and southern Brazil, was about to begin. The soldiers marched with patriotic fervor, confident in their leader and their cause. But they were marching towards a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. A war that would bleed their nation white and leave a scar on the soul of a continent. The bloodiest conflict in South American history had just begun. The story of what happens next is one of incredible bravery, horrific brutality, and national sacrifice on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. If you found this history compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We set the stage for one of South America's most devastating conflicts. Now, we plunge into the heart of the storm. Hell on the rivers, the bloody campaigns of the Triple Alliance. When war erupted, Paraguayan President Francisco Solano López didn't wait. He believed a swift, decisive strike was his only chance against the sheer size of his neighbors. His initial plan was ambitious, to say the least. In late 1864, he seized a Brazilian vessel and invaded the Mato Grosso province. It was a bold opening move, and Paraguayan forces initially found success, capturing key forts and towns with relative ease. Emboldened, López turned his sights south. His goal was to march his army through Argentine territory to attack Brazil's southern provinces and aid his allies in Uruguay. But when Argentina refused passage, López made a fateful decision. He declared war on them as well. This act of aggression was the final piece of the puzzle. In May 1865, Brazil, Argentina, and the new pro-Brazilian government of Uruguay formalized their pact, signing the Treaty of the Triple Alliance. Their stated goal was to depose López, but the secret articles of the treaty revealed a more punishing aim: to seize vast amounts of Paraguayan territory and cripple the nation indefinitely. Paraguay was now surrounded, facing a coalition of giants with a combined population over 25 times its own. The stage was set for a brutal, drawn-out conflict. López launched a two-pronged invasion. One column moved down the Paraguay River, while the other, larger force advanced down the Paraná River, aiming to capture the strategic Argentine city of Corrientes. Initially, they were successful. The Paraguayan soldiers, known for their discipline and ferocity, pushed the unprepared Argentine forces back. But the alliance's greatest advantage was not on land, it was on the water. The Brazilian Imperial Navy, the most powerful in South America, controlled the river systems that were Paraguay's arteries for trade and communication. The turning point came on June 11, 1865, at the Battle of Riachuelo on the Paraná River. The Paraguayan Navy, a collection of mostly converted commercial steamers, launched a surprise attack on the superior Brazilian fleet. It was a desperate gamble. After a full day of ferocious combat, characterized by ramming, cannon fire, and brutal hand-to-hand fighting as ships grappled together, the Brazilian Navy emerged victorious. The Paraguayan fleet was shattered. This single battle was a strategic catastrophe for Paraguay. It cut off López's invading army in Argentina from its supply lines and reinforcements, effectively stranding them deep in enemy territory. The momentum of the Paraguayan offensive was broken. Now the war shifted dramatically. The Triple Alliance, having secured control of the rivers, began its slow, grinding advance into Paraguay itself. But López was not a man to surrender. He established a formidable defensive system of trenches, forts, and artillery batteries just north of the confluence of the Paraná and Paraguay rivers. This complex, known as the Quadrilateral, was designed to be an impenetrable bastion. It was here in the swamps and marshes of southern Paraguay that the war descended into its most horrific phase. The conflict became a war of annihilation, a battle for survival fought in blood and mud. On May 24, 1866, the Alliance launched a massive frontal assault on the main Paraguayan trench line at Tuyuti. What followed was the single bloodiest day in South American history. Tens of thousands of soldiers clashed in a chaotic, brutal melee that lasted for hours. The Paraguayan forces, fighting with desperate courage on their home soil, inflicted staggering casualties on the Allies, but suffered even more devastating losses themselves. While the Alliance failed to break the line, the battle was a Pyrrhic victory for Paraguay. They lost a huge portion of their veteran soldiers, men who were simply irreplaceable. Despite the horrific losses at Tuyuti, the Paraguayan defenses held. At the Battle of Curupayty in September 1866, Paraguayan artillery, brilliantly positioned behind well-dug trenches, completely decimated an attacking force of 20,000 Argentines and Brazilians. The Allied army was repulsed with thousands of casualties, while the Paraguayans suffered fewer than 100. This stunning victory temporarily halted the Allied advance for over a year and caused a major crisis within the Allied command. It proved that Paraguayan resolve was far from broken, but victories on the battlefield couldn't stop a more insidious enemy: attrition. The Allied naval blockade was strangling Paraguay. Food became scarce. Medicine ran out. Soldiers and soon civilians began to suffer from malnutrition and disease. Cholera, smallpox, and dysentery swept through the Paraguayan camps and towns, killing thousands and sapping the strength of the army. Lopez's forces were being ground down day by day. Every soldier lost was a national tragedy, while the Allies could draw on their vast populations to replace their losses. The war became a grim math equation that Paraguay could never solve. For over a year, the armies stared at each other across the trenches of the quadrilateral. The Allied command, shaken by the disaster at Curupayty, was paralyzed by indecision. But the relentless pressure of the blockade and the constant skirmishing took their toll. Finally, the Brazilian forces, under a new and more aggressive commander, the Marquis of Caxias, devised a new strategy. Instead of another costly frontal assault, they executed a brilliant flanking maneuver. While part of the fleet bypassed the fortress of Curupayty, a large force of Brazilian infantry marched for miles through uncharted and treacherous marshland to encircle the entire Paraguayan defensive line from the rear. This maneuver, completed in late 1867 and early 1868, sealed the fate of the quadrilateral. The Paraguayan army was now trapped. One by one, the fortresses began to fall. The Allied advance became relentless. Lopez was forced to abandon his capital, Asunción, which fell to the Allies in January 1869. The city was brutally sacked. Libraries were burned, homes were looted, and the national archives were destroyed or shipped to Rio de Janeiro. To the outside world, the war seemed to be over. The capital was taken, the army was shattered, and the country was occupied. But Francisco Solano López refused to admit defeat. He declared Asunción a den of traitors, and retreated with the remnants of his government and army into the rugged interior of Paraguay. The war was not over. It had just entered its final, most tragic phase. He would now conscript children and old men, melting down church bells to forge new cannons. He would fight to the very last Paraguayan. The capture of Asunción marked the end of conventional warfare, but the beginning of a desperate guerrilla struggle. Lopez's harrowing retreat into the wilderness, the campaign of the hills, and witnessed the final agonizing destruction of the Paraguayan nation. It is a story of unimaginable suffering and a testament to the depths of human endurance and the fanaticism of a leader who would sacrifice everything. By 1869, the war was, for all intents and purposes, over. The Allied forces of Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay had conquered every major city, destroyed the Paraguayan army, and occupied the capital, Asunción. The country was in ruins. Any rational leader would have surrendered. But Francisco Solano López was not a rational leader. He was a man possessed by a vision of glory, even if that glory could only be found in a nation's utter annihilation. This is the story of Paraguay's last stand, a horrifying final act of a tragedy that would scar a continent. The Paraguayan War. We witnessed the death of a nation. When the Allies marched into Asunción in January 1869, they found a ghost town. The once bustling capital was deserted, its residents having fled into the interior. The invaders, led by the Brazilian commander, the Duke of Caxias, looted what was left. Palaces were stripped bare, churches were desecrated, and private homes were ransacked. Caxias, believing the war was won, declared an end to hostilities and returned to Brazil, leaving a provisional government in his wake. But López was not finished. From the rugged interior, he declared a new capital and began to forge a new army. This wasn't the disciplined force that had fought at the start of the war. This was an army of ghosts. Old men, invalids, and most tragically, children were conscripted into service. Boys as young as 8 were given fake beards and wooden rifles, painted to look real from a distance and sent to the front lines. These were not soldiers. They were sacrifices. López, now ruling by pure terror, executed anyone suspected of disloyalty, including his own brothers. He was no longer a president. He was a tyrant presiding over a dying kingdom. The Allies, stunned by López's refusal to quit, appointed a new commander, Gaston d'Orléans, the Count of Eu, the son-in-law of the Brazilian emperor. The Count of Eu was determined to hunt López down and end the war once and for all. What followed was not a campaign, but a manhunt across the desolate Paraguayan landscape. The new Paraguayan army, if you could call it that, was no match for the veteran Allied troops. The battles of this final phase were less like battles and more like massacres. The most infamous of these was the Battle of Acosta New in August 1869. Here, a force of around 3,500 children, aged 6 to 15, commanded by a handful of veteran officers, stood against 20,000 battle-hardened Allied soldiers. For 8 hours, these children fought with unimaginable bravery. When the battle seemed lost, the mothers and sisters who had followed the army into the field set fire to the tall grass, hoping to create a screen of smoke to allow their children to escape. Instead, the fire trapped them. The Allies showed no mercy. Wounded children calling for their mothers were bayoneted. By the end of the day, thousands of children lay dead on the field. Acosta New is remembered in Paraguay today as Children's Day, a solemn tribute to the generation that was sacrificed. López, however, always managed to escape. He fled further and further north, deeper into the jungle, his followers dwindling with every step. His personal guard, his family, and his mistress, Eliza Lynch, were all that remained of his once grand ambitions. The pursuit was relentless. The Count of Eu's forces closed in, tracking him through swamps and forests. The end finally came on March 1, 1870, at a place called Cerro Corá, near the border with Brazil. López's tiny, starving band of followers was cornered. In the final desperate skirmish, López himself was wounded by a Brazilian lancer. He dragged himself to the banks of the Aquidauban Nigui stream. A Brazilian general offered him a chance to surrender with a guarantee of his life. López, defiant to the very end, refused. With his last breath, he brandished his sword and famously declared, "Muero con mi patria, I die with my country." He was then killed, and with him the war was finally over. His last words would become the defining myth of modern Paraguay, a symbol of ultimate unyielding resistance. When the guns fell silent, the world slowly began to comprehend the scale of the devastation. The aftermath was just as brutal as the war itself. Paraguay was occupied by Brazilian and Argentine troops for 6 years. The victors imposed a harsh peace. Paraguay lost huge swaths of territory to both Argentina and Brazil, about 40% of its pre-war land. The country was forced to pay an enormous war indemnity, a debt so large it would cripple its economy for generations, and was only finally paid off in 1943. The nation had to be rebuilt from scratch, largely by its women. Known as Las Residentas, these women became the pillars of a new Paraguay. They tilled the fields, rebuilt homes, and repopulated the nation. Their resilience and strength in the face of unimaginable loss are a central part of Paraguay's national identity today. The war also fundamentally reshaped the balance of power in South America. Brazil emerged as the dominant regional power. Its military and political influence solidified. Argentina, while a victor, had also suffered heavy losses and had to contend with internal revolts spurred by the unpopular war. The Triple Alliance itself fractured almost as soon as the war ended, with Brazil and Argentina jockeying for control over the shattered Paraguayan state. So how do we remember this war? Was López a heroic patriot who died defending his homeland against overwhelming odds? Or was he a megalomaniacal tyrant who dragged his people into a suicidal conflict and refused to surrender long after all hope was lost? The truth, as is often the case, is complex and lies somewhere in between. In Paraguay, he is often revered as a national hero, a symbol of defiance. For the Allies, he was a dictator who threatened regional stability. What is undeniable is the legacy of suffering. The Paraguayan War stands as a chilling monument to the destructive power of nationalism, ambition, and the utter folly of war. It's a story of a nation that fought to the last man and very nearly had none left. A haunting reminder that the price of glory can be the very soul of a country. Thank you for joining us for this history's most devastating and forgotten conflicts. We hope this has shed some light on a crucial chapter in South American history.